Ouagadougou, 5:57 a.m. Burkina Faso's National Defense Radar picks up an anomaly, a group of heavily armed operatives moving in tight formation slipping through the northern military buffer zone. No flags, no IFF signals. Just one thing left behind, deadly silence. 3 minutes later, the government's communication center goes dark. The last transmission from the presidential palace is a burst of red code, black protocol, level 1 emergency, and then Ibrahim Traoré vanishes. No trace, no footage, no voice, just a vacuum of power before sunrise. A deep source whispers high-frequency intercepts, picked up signal patterns consistent with Ukrainian military-grade encryption. No one dares speak it aloud, but everyone knows foreign hands are in play. By late afternoon, the sky over Ouagadougou turns crimson. 2 Russian Ilyushin-76 aircraft descend in combat mode. Spetsnaz, elite special forces, deploy with clinical silence. No press, no politics. Just one directive: find Traoré, at any cost. This is no longer a civil crisis. It's a covert war between Russia, Ukraine, and the West, fought on West African soil. And Ibrahim Traoré, once a symbol of African sovereignty, now finds himself a pawn in a game where a single wrong move could ignite a continent. Ouagadougou, 3:22 a.m. Burkina Faso's Internal Security Command picks up an unusual signal, an encrypted high-frequency transmission emanating from military zone K30, just 12 kilometers from the presidential palace. The origin is unclear, but data patterns point east. Eastern Europe. I need satellite visuals on zone K30, immediately. Uploading. We've got movement. Unknown group, armed, tactical formation. 3:34 a.m. Communications with the presidential compound go dead. The elite guard scrambles, but receives no orders. President Ibrahim Traoré was last seen entering Secure Room 5, isolated and without external contact. His final message is a red flag code, BD01, top priority, internal breach. 4:15 a.m., a crisis meeting convenes in the underground bunker beneath the Ministry of Defense. Colonel Kabore, head of counterintelligence, slams his fist on the table. We're looking at a Western-style infiltration. This isn't just mercenaries. I'm calling it NATO fingerprints via Ukraine. That's insane. They wouldn't risk open intervention. A young officer protests. 3 high-ranking officers. French train disappear the same hour Traoré goes dark. That's not coincidence. That's coordination. At a covert satellite relay hub, an intelligence analyst detects encrypted signals matching Ukrainian military transmissions used during the Bakhmut siege. 4:47 a.m. inside Secure Room 5. Traoré is cornered by 3 masked operatives in black combat suits, no insignia. One speaks French with a distinct Eastern European accent. Mr. President, we're not here to kill you, but we can if you don't cooperate. Who sent you? Traoré remains composed. You chose the wrong side. We're here to correct that. A silenced pistol presses against his forehead. The room trembles, lights flicker. An explosion shakes the compound. 5:10 a.m. Russian special forces make entry. Spetsnaz has arrived. No press releases, no diplomacy. This is Grey directive authorized straight from the Kremlin. 3-point entry. Target Secure Room 5. Priority extract alive. The Spetsnaz commander orders via comms. How the hell did they know? One mercenary shouts, panicking. The Russians. They've got eyes everywhere. The firefight is swift and surgical. 7 mercenaries down, 2 captured. Traoré is extracted with a minor shoulder wound, his jacket soaked in blood eyes, colder than steel. I know who you are, and I promise this will be your last job on African soil. 6:00 a.m. Across West African social media, images of Traoré stepping out of a Russian armored vehicle go viral. Some hail him as unbreakable. Others whisper, we've just traded one master for another, and no one asked the people. 5:15 a.m. Ouagadougou. No one in Burkina Faso's government saw it coming. No warning, no diplomatic requests. But from the northern air corridor, 2 Russian Ilyushin Il-76 aircraft sliced through the skies and landed at a military airstrip on the city's edge. Moments later, over 60 elite Spetsnaz operatives disembarked fully armed. No insignias, no emblems. Just one message in their stride and eyes: they were here to act, not to ask. Confirm the source of those reinforcements. No registry logs. IFF system remotely bypassed. Signal matches Spetsnaz GRU. My God. Moscow really pulled the trigger. From the Kremlin, the response was marked Gray Directive. Level 0 reserved only for events deemed a direct threat to Russia's strategic global influence. Burkina Faso, since its turn away from the West, was no longer just a former colony. It was part of Moscow's new African perimeter. And Traore, he was a card the Kremlin refused to lose. Primary objective: secure President Ibrahim Traoré alive. No third-party units must reach him before us. Expected opposition: high chance of foreign-backed mercenaries. Western-style tactics: unofficial operations. Rules of engagement: full autonomy. No restrictions. Geneva doesn't apply here. Spetsnaz deployed in 3 prongs: northeast and central breach. Thermal drones scan the underground levels of the presidential palace. Enemy signatures confirmed in sub-level 3. To minimize casualties and protect the asset, silent infiltration protocols were activated: suppressors, tactical knives, flash stunners. The assault lasted only 9 minutes. 4 mercenaries were downed before they could shift positions. 3 more attempted escape, cornered at the west hallway. 1 surrendered, and what he revealed chilled the command post. We took orders from a civilian contractor tied to Eastern European defense networks. Name the outfit: Orion Security. Not Russian. They said they had Western political clearance. We weren't told more. His jacket torn, blood trailing from a gash on his shoulder, but his expression remains calm. As a Spetsnaz operator lifts him into the armored vehicle, Traoré turns toward the smoking ruins of the palace and whispers, "History won't forget this morning. But it will remember who came first." Images of him seated inside the Russian armored truck, Kremlin flag, hastily taped to the window, explode across African social media. Western press was blocked from entry, but footage from civilian drones and anonymous insiders went viral within hours. France reacts first. We are deeply concerned about foreign military interference in a sovereign African nation. The U.S. follows with a cautious statement: we urge all parties to respect international law and democratic processes. Inside NATO, classified briefings reveal a fractured response. One bloc calls for decisive pressure on Russia. Another admits grimly, "We've lost Burkina Faso." Ukraine remains silent. But Russian defense officials confirm that a communication device recovered from the site matched encryption protocols used in Donbass operations. The narrative of denial grows thin. Spetsnaz withdraws, handing control of the zone to a restructured presidential guard. The compound is locked down for 48 hours, undergoing internal surveillance sweeps for spies and hidden tech. At 9:15 a.m., Traoré reappears on national television. His voice steady, his tone hard. "Last night, an invisible hand tried to rewrite our fate, but we are still here. And we will never bow to any empire, no matter where they come from." Ouagadougou. 3 days after the rescue operation. The city appears to have returned to normal. Morning markets are bustling motorbikes, jostle through dusty streets, and the local radio plays dry routine bulletins. But beneath that thin surface, no one truly believes things are the same. President Traoré is alive. But the real question is, does he still hold power? And if he does, is it his to wield? What local media now call the Silent Night revealed more than an assassination plot. It wasn't just about Ukrainian mercenaries. It was a multinational operation designed to reset the strategic alignment of an entire country without a single public shot fired. The president was isolated, the army fractured. A transitional government was allegedly ready to step in, but it failed because of one variable the plotters hadn't calculated: Russia's immediate and decisive response. That intervention saved Traoré's life, but it also cemented a reality no one can ignore. The government of Burkina Faso now survives behind a Russian shield. Within 72 hours, Russian forces established a special security zone around all state institutions. The Spetsnaz withdrew, but were replaced by military advisors, counterintelligence experts, and strategic engineers. No formal uniforms, but everyone understood Burkina Faso had entered the geopolitical map of Moscow. The flag of Burkina Faso still flies over the presidential palace, but at its gates, presidential guards now wear dual patches, the national colors and red-white insignia from Russia. Among intellectual circles, hushed conversations grow louder. Did we really win, or just trade one master for another? There was no NATO retaliation, no emergency sanctions, just vague press statements concerned monitoring the situation calls for peace. In Paris and Washington, internal memos revealed a starker truth. We're witnessing the collapse of Western influence in West Africa. Burkina Faso is the first domino. Nearby nations Mali, Niger, even Ghana have begun reassessing their ties to the West. In Mali, where French forces were expelled in 2023, the events in Ouagadougou are seen as validation of a non-Western path. Younger generations hail Traoré as the man who dared to play the independence card. Clips of him emerging from the armored truck, bloodied but unshaken, have become symbols of defiance. But in tea houses, slums, and among civil servants, a quieter fear spreads. We traded political freedom for temporary security. The Russians will come to collect, through gold oil control. He once symbolized a break from colonialism, a young soldier who vowed to cut the neo-colonial chains. But today, even as he breathes, Traoré stands at a crossroads. Continue deepening ties with Russia, gaining short-term stability at the risk of losing long-term sovereignty, or attempt to rebalance alliances even if it provokes the very power that just saved him. In his latest address, he declared, "Burkina Faso will not be anyone's playground. We cooperate, but we do not kneel." Yet the question still lingers: who truly commands in Ouagadougou now? The crisis may be over, but the fracture remains, and all of Africa is watching Burkina Faso as a global experiment. If Traoré succeeds in holding power and rebuilding the state, the model of unconditioned multi-alignment may spread across the continent. If he fails, Burkina Faso may become just another case of dependence disguised as sovereignty. The final verdict: it may be far too early to call this a victory. Ouagadougou, 1 week after the coup attempt. The smoke has cleared, the streets are calm, and the world has moved on. But inside Burkina Faso, something has changed, something deeper than politics or military maneuvers. A man has survived, and not just any man, President Ibrahim Traoré. Once considered a transitional figure, a former army captain thrust into power by chaos, Traoré is now seen by many as a symbol of African resilience. His survival wasn't just physical, it was psychological, strategic, and symbolic. He didn't just live through an assassination attempt. He outplayed forces far beyond his borders. When Traoré emerged from the Russian armored vehicle, bleeding but standing tall, he wasn't just a man who had cheated death. He became a living narrative, a statement against foreign dominance. Cameras captured every detail: his torn jacket, the blood on his sleeve, the fire in his eyes. In his first address, post-rescue, he didn't thank Russia outright. He didn't blame Ukraine. He didn't speak of revenge. He said something that would echo far beyond Ouagadougou. They came for my life, but they forgot one thing: I belong to my people. Not to them, not to anyone. Those words went viral across African networks. Even in neighboring countries where politics remained tightly pro-Western, his speech sparked a quiet admiration. Suddenly, Traoré was not just a president, he was a message. Traoré's near-death experience reshaped his political posture. No longer defensive, no longer cautious, he stepped back into public view with confidence. Rebuilding began immediately, not just in bricks and security fences, but in institutions and public trust. State broadcasters began airing documentaries on sovereignty without submission. Billboards across the capital showed Traoré's face next to slogans like, "We don't kneel to fear, we stand in fire." In schools, students were assigned essays on African self-determination. Universities held forums on geopolitical realignment. Civil servants, once demoralized, now rallied around a common cause, restoring national dignity. For Traoré, pride isn't personal, it's national. In private meetings, aides report he speaks often of his ancestors, of past betrayals by colonizers, of the weight of history that leaders must carry. This time, he once said behind closed doors, "We don't trade one empire for another. This time, we write our own rules." He insists on transparency with new Russian advisors. He demands renegotiation of old mining contracts, some of them held by Canadian, French, and even Russian entities. His message is clear: you may help us, but you will not own us. And slowly, the people believe him. International media once described him as Russia's pawn. But post-crisis, that narrative shifted. Now headlines read, "The African president who faced the world and didn't blink." In diplomatic circles, Traoré is now a wild card. The West doesn't know whether to confront him or court him. Russia sees him as a strategic ally, but one who won't be easily controlled. At a regional summit in Niamey, he gave a speech with no notes, no teleprompter. Just conviction. "We've tried asking for permission. It brought us debt. It brought us war. Now we ask no one. We build. We defend. We decide." The room erupted in applause. Even leaders who previously distanced themselves from Traoré stood to shake his hand. Something had changed, but Traoré knows the battle isn't over. The next war won't be fought in bunkers or with bullets. It'll be in contracts, infrastructure, digital space, and national unity. He's ordered sweeping anti-corruption measures. He's increasing investments in education and local industry. He's demanding accountability from both his ministers and his foreign partners. In a televised interview, when asked if he trusts the Russians, Traoré paused and said, "I trust the ground under my feet. I trust the people who bleed with me. Everyone else I watch." No one knows how long Traoré will last in power. His enemies haven't disappeared. Foreign interests haven't given up. But for now, he stands tall, not just as a survivor, but as a leader who refused to be written off. Children chant his name in the streets. Artists paint his portrait in murals. Farmers in rural provinces speak of him as one of our own who fought for us. There's still poverty, still unrest, but there's something else now too, hope. Not because a foreign army came to help, but because a leader chose to stand to bleed and not to kneel. This is not just the story of a failed coup. This is the story of a continent remembering how to say no, of a young man who looked at empires and said not this time. Ibrahim Traoré survived, but more importantly, he made survival look like resistance. Yet as the world fixates on diplomacy and the geopolitical chessboard, an equally crucial front opens information warfare. Inside a modest building on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, a new digital command center comes online. Rows of young engineers, coders, and open-source investigators monitor foreign media narratives, trace bot activity, and counter disinformation campaigns targeting the presidency. Under the codename Kwame Watchtower, named after a pre-colonial warrior who once united feuding tribes, this team operates with a simple mission: own the story before others write it. Traoré understands too well that power today isn't just held in weapons or alliances, it lies in narrative control. What the world believes is often more influential than what actually happened. Through this unit, Burkina Faso launches its first official African language news channel, broadcasting in Mooré, Fulfulde Dioula and French. Its programming isn't just about government propaganda. It features interviews with farmers, historians, local innovators, and even critics of the regime. The goal: to build a media ecosystem rooted in national dignity and regional voice, not foreign validation. At the same time, Traoré's administration quietly accelerates an ambitious economic pivot away from extractive exports and toward local value chains. In the dusty town of Tenkodogo, long dismissed as peripheral, a pilot factory for solar battery assembly opens with regional collaboration from Ghana and Kenya. In Gawa, a cooperative of women miners is trained to refine gold using eco-friendly methods. It's symbolic, yes, but also strategic. The president knows Burkina Faso cannot resist global pressure on pride alone. Resilience must have roots jobs, food sovereignty, and basic dignity. He commissions a national grain reserve system inspired by old Sahelian trade routes, where every province must now contribute to emergency stockpiles. The first silos open within 60 days. Children cheer as the first sacks arrive, painted not with donor logos, but with national emblems and the phrase, "Ours for us." Notably, Traoré begins hosting quiet dialogues with religious leaders, tribal elders, and former political opponents. He seeks not applause, but alignment. In one such session, a Catholic priest, an imam, and a traditional healer sit side by side. "You want a nation," the priest says, "but you'll need a soul first." Traoré listens not as a president, but as a man who has seen too many regimes mistake survival for success. That night he pens a letter to his cabinet. "We are not building a fortress. We are planting a tree. Its roots must touch every corner of this land, or it will fall with the first storm." Meanwhile, foreign pressure takes subtler forms. Burkina Faso faces sudden hikes in trade tariffs. International banks delay loan clearances. NGOs quietly report growing risks in operating inside the country. A UN resolution, vague in language but sharp in implication, questions the recent militarization of civilian governance. Traoré does not overreact, but neither does he retreat. In response, he calls for an emergency summit of Sahel nations, one not brokered by Paris, Brussels, or Washington, but by the people who share borders, rivers, and scars. The summit is modest. No red carpets, no lavish banquets, just a round table under a canvas tent in Dori. There, Traoré proposes a Sahel Solidarity Charter, joint defense pacts, shared food logistics, and a regional development bank, funded by local gold and phosphate reserves. "We can't wait for aid to build roads," he says. "Let's pave them with our own hands." Mali's delegate nods. Niger's envoy claps. Even Chad, long wary of change, sends a positive signal. Back in Ouagadougou, rumors swirl that the next coup may not come from outside, but from within. Traoré's inner circle grows smaller. His chief of protocol is reassigned. A trusted military advisor is dismissed after encrypted calls with a European diplomat are discovered. But the president remains resolute. In private, he tells his new security team, "If I fall, they must do more than kill me. They must erase every story, every voice, every seed we planted. Because if even one root remains, they will never reclaim this land." And so Burkina Faso stands not yet victorious, not yet secure, but no longer silent. A continent watches, the winds shift, and beneath the surface something old stirs, a memory of dignity and a hunger for a future, forged not in foreign capitals but in the fire of self-determination. As the weeks pass, the silhouette of Traoré no longer belongs to just one man, it begins to resemble a movement. In the neighborhoods of Ouagadougou, young artists paint his image, not with medals or flags, but in symbolic forms. Traoré as a tree, his roots gripping the Sahel. Traoré as a drum, echoing ancestral rhythms. Traoré as a flame, defiant against the wind. His survival becomes a canvas onto which the people project their longing for autonomy, for dignity, for something they were told to stop dreaming of. But dreams alone won't anchor a nation. Inside the Economic Stabilization Council, a temporary wartime structure adapted into a permanent advisory body, tensions brew. Some argue for closer integration with the BRICS alliance, seeing in it a counterweight to Western financial domination. Others warn of a different trap, swapping one dependency for another. Just because the leash is gold, mutters an old economist, doesn't mean it isn't still a leash. Traore listens to all sides, but his decisions are less ideological and more pragmatic. He greenlights talks with Brazil on agricultural exchange. He opens airspace to Chinese tech drones, but bans them from surveillance zones. He authorizes uranium audits, something no president before him dared, insisting on full disclosure of how much was mined, exported, and profited. It is not a pivot, it is a calibration. Meanwhile, intelligence reports indicate growing unrest in the northern provinces. Ethnic tensions long buried under the surface are being inflamed by outside actors. Leaflets appear overnight written in perfect fulfulde, but printed on foreign stock paper, accusing the government of favoring southern elites. They want us to tear ourselves apart, Traore says during a crisis meeting. When we fight each other, they don't need to invade. We're already conquered. To counter this, he revives an ancient custom, the cross-village oath. Tribal leaders from rival regions are invited to the capital, where in a public ceremony they renew peace pacts, first written by their ancestors. It is not for the cameras, it is for the people watching from dusty radios, feeling history stir in the echo of ancient words. In the background, whispers grow about Traore's spiritual convictions. Though not overtly religious, he begins visiting ancestral shrines, meeting griots and sages. He says little during these visits, but those who witness them note something unusual. He walks barefoot. Some see it as humility, others as an invocation. The press, both foreign and local, demand explanations. Is he turning to superstition, avoiding global institutions, becoming a mystic? He answers none directly. But in a televised Q&A, when asked why he doesn't rely more on international experts, he replies, "Because I've seen what their expertise did to us. We became perfectly managed into poverty." Internally, his government pushes forward a radical education reform, not just in curriculum but in language. Starting next term, primary schools across the country will begin teaching in native languages. First, French comes second. History books are rewritten to include resistance movements once erased. Economics classes start with barter systems and pre-colonial trade networks before introducing capitalism. One Western diplomat calls it historical revisionism, but to a teenage student in Kodugu, it's the first time he sees his grandfather's village mentioned in a textbook. Still, the road remains treacherous. At the UN, Burkina Faso's seat becomes increasingly lonely. Funding for peacekeeping missions is slashed. Climate aid gets delayed. Invitations to multilateral summits get lost in bureaucracy. Behind the scenes, powerful lobbies push to isolate the country, hoping economic pressure will do what bullets could not. But isolation to Traore is not exile, it's purification. In an internal memo leaked months later, he writes, "Let them withdraw. What remains is ours, and what we build in silence, they will one day fear in noise." The most controversial move comes on the 45th day after the coup attempt. He announces the nationalization of all state-critical infrastructure, energy, railways, communication networks. Foreign shareholders are offered buyouts fair but firm. Protests erupt at embassies in Paris and Ottawa. Stock prices dip. But in Ouagadougou, the markets stay open. Power stays on. And by dusk, the capital is dancing. "We thought we'd go dark," one shopkeeper laughs. "But for the first time, we lit our own lights." From South Africa to Senegal, the story of Burkina Faso begins to shift. Not as a failed state or a Russian pawn, but as a laboratory where dignity is not theory but policy, where sovereignty is not abstract but asphalt and textbooks and crops and passwords. And in all of this, Traore is not untouchable. He faces criticism, setbacks, and sabotage. His reforms trigger bureaucratic slowdowns. His anti-corruption unit uncovers scandals that touch close to his own party, yet he doesn't hide. When a whistleblower exposes bribery inside the Ministry of Natural Resources, Traore appears at a press conference and reads the charges aloud himself. We are not new because we say so. We are new because we face the rot, then clean it. On the 60th day since the failed coup, Traore walks into a village in the north that once harbored rebel groups. No security escort, no armored vehicles, just him and a small team. A crowd gathers wary. A young boy no older than 10 asks him, "Are you afraid to come here?" Traore kneels and says, "Yes, but I come anyway." Because fear only wins when you stay home. The crowd goes silent, then applause, then tears. And somewhere in the hills, someone who once held a gun lowers it, not because they were defeated, but because they were seen. Beyond Burkina Faso's borders, a quiet storm begins to ripple across the Sahel, and far beyond. In Bamako Street, murals now feature Traore alongside Malian independence icon Modibo Keïta, their eyes painted toward the horizon. In Niamey, young students gather to reenact the Silent Night rescue in school plays. In Lomé and Freetown, calls for currency reform resurface with new urgency, inspired by what many now call the Traore doctrine. But no movement rises without resistance. In the corridors of ECOWAS, unease grows. A leaked communiqué from a West African economic advisor warns, if the Burkina Faso model spreads unchecked, we may witness a regional unraveling of the CFA system, foreign military pacts, and transnational investment agreements anchored in post-colonial norms. To some, this sounds like chaos, but to others it sounds like justice long delayed. In response, certain regional leaders, long viewed as pro-Western moderates, begin consolidating power. Press freedoms are restricted. Civil society groups are labeled destabilizing agents. The irony doesn't escape Traore. The very people who once preached stability now show their fear not of Russia, but of a people awakened. Inside the Pan-African Council, a bloc of younger nations proposes the Ouaga Protocol, named after Ouagadougou. It outlines 3 key principles: anti-coup sovereignty, rejection of foreign military bases, and open access to African financial data for public scrutiny. The motion doesn't pass, but it gains 11 votes. A year ago, it would have received none. Meanwhile, Traore's attention shifts to a deeper threat: cyber warfare. Burkina Faso's digital infrastructure, once largely passive, now faces aggressive phishing campaigns, surveillance drones near telecom towers, and false flag data leaks. A disinformation storm falsely accuses the government of detaining opposition leaders. Deepfake videos circulate showing a weakened Traore allegedly negotiating asylum in Russia. None of it is true, but perception moves faster than truth. So Traore acts. He forms a civilian digital defense league, composed of young hackers, coders, and online activists. Their job not just to protect the state, but to defend the people's story. They train in open-source tools, deconstruct AI-generated content, and teach media literacy in public schools. Their motto, "We don't block lies, we reveal them." And they do. One viral thread exposes how a supposed anti-government protest video was actually from a 2017 event in Chile. Another reveals that servers spreading anti-Traore propaganda were linked to think tanks in Europe with military ties. More than military resilience, this is narrative resilience, and in the 21st century it may matter more. Yet even as he deflects cyber sabotage and regional backlash, Traore must face a more intimate reckoning. Trust. Some allies begin to question his pace. Too much, too fast, they whisper. Too independent. Inside his inner circle, fatigue sets in. Reforms are endless. Enemies are everywhere. The glow of revolution dims beneath the grind of governance. But Traore, always one step ahead, begins preparing a decentralized leadership model. He empowers provincial governors with greater autonomy, launches a national training academy for young civil servants, and creates a succession resilience file to ensure continuity in case of political upheaval. He knows what few leaders dare admit: he may not be here forever, but the idea, if strong enough, will outlive the man. And so Burkina Faso prepares for its next season, not with fear, not with certainty, but with something rarer: conviction that their story belongs to them and no one else. In the end, what Ibrahim Traoré represents is not merely a chapter in Burkina Faso's volatile history. He represents a pivot, a recalibration of what post-colonial leadership might dare to look like when it no longer seeks validation from the outside. His survival was a singular moment, but his legacy, if it takes root, could become a continental mirror, a reflection of what Africa could be if it finally claimed authorship over its own destiny. And yet Traoré himself never claims perfection. He never declares victory. His addresses avoid grandiosity. His policies are not flawless. His enemies are not vanquished. But what makes his story unforgettable is the raw truth it reveals: that sovereignty, when practiced honestly, is messy, risky, and deeply human. Burkina Faso still faces famine threats, infrastructure deficits, and regional volatility. The scars of war and manipulation run deep, but there is now a rhythm of self-awareness pulsing through the country. Children who once memorized the names of European generals are now learning the geography of their own rivers. Farmers once bound to exploitative contracts now sit at negotiating tables. Women who were kept out of governance now run municipal councils in provinces once written off as too traditional. No outsider can fully understand what this means. No foreign analyst can quantify it in charts or policy briefs. Because what has begun in Burkina Faso is not just political reform, it is emotional reconstruction. It is the repair of pride, the rebuilding of collective memory, the quiet rejection of shame handed down through centuries of extraction and paternalism. Traoré's leadership at its core has never been about isolation or rage. It has been about boundaries, the kind that say, "You may engage with us, but you do not get to define us." His boldest act may not have been expelling mercenaries or exposing foreign plots. It may have been sitting with elders in the dirt, asking, "What did our grandfathers know that we forgot?" And perhaps that is where his greatest strength lies, not in the alliances he builds, nor the enemies he defies, but in the questions he dares to ask. Questions most leaders avoid. Questions that begin not with, "What can we take?" but "Who are we without them?" The world may yet turn its back again. Sanctions may rise. Lies may be broadcast louder than truth. Another coup may be financed from somewhere cold and distant. But Burkina Faso has already crossed a threshold. It has dared to imagine itself uncolonized, not just in borders, but in thought. And in doing so, it has forced Africa, and perhaps the world, to pay attention. Because in an age of corporate empires and algorithmic rule, a dusty, landlocked nation dared to say no, dared to bleed and still speak, dared to fall without breaking, dared to remember who it was before the silence. As dusk falls over Ouagadougou and the lights flicker back on, not just from imported grids, but from solar panels built by its own hands, the message becomes unmistakable. Burkina Faso